Right.
Awesome. Alright, well, this is John Van Alstine. Kind of gave himself a little thing, so I'll just say a little bit more about him. My name is Irene Bridges, and I'm assisting with the speaker series here at Landmark College. After today's talk, unfortunately, this will be the last talk for this semester, so we hope you thoroughly enjoy it. But stay tuned for more information about next year's speakers. So first, a few announcements. As usual, will everyone please take a moment to silence your cell phones and remove them.
Yes, or I'll shoot you with a laser.
Wow, all of y'all are good about silencing your cell phones. Alright, so the speaker series would like to appreciate our sponsors, SoberNet Communications, Leader Beverages, and the Richards Group Insurance, along with Green Mountain Tents. Now, John Van Alstine will speak for around 45 minutes, but will also give a 1-minute break for any of y'all who have to go do homework or so forth to do so. However, we also welcome you to stay longer for a lively question and answer period that will last about 20-25 minutes. Now, John Van Alstine will, so who is John Van Alstine? John Van Alstine's work has been exhibited widely, including over 50 solo exhibitions in this country, as well as Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He has completed many major large-scale outdoor site-specific communications, recently installed a very large outdoor work for the 2008 Olympic Park in Beijing, and a 35-foot tall piece for the new Indianapolis Airport. His work is held in major museum collections in this country and abroad. They include the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., the Museum of American Art, also in Washington, D.C., the Denver Museum of Art, the Houston Museum of Art, and many more. Now please help me to welcome John.
Thank you, Irene. That was a great introduction. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to try to keep this informal. I'll get chugging along, but if you have questions along the way, just raise your hand or shout out so we can address those questions actually when the time is most pertinent. The title of the talk, as you may have gleaned, is Turning Negatives Positive, a Sculptor's Journey. And basically what that does is it gives me a framework to talk about my work, but also point out important milestones, important events, important things that initially seemed negative, as we all have negative things, and finding creative ways around them and or through them or over them. So this is just my introduction page. I should indicate I was lucky enough to, my first studios were in Washington, D.C., and then in Jersey City. And I was lucky enough in 1987 to find this abandoned lumber mill in the Adirondacks. Not an awful lot different than your landscape here. And that allowed me to resurrect some of the buildings, use them for studios, and create a sculpture garden. I share the space with my partner Caroline Rommersdorfer, who works in stone, mostly marble, and cuts into the stone, kind of internal kind of inspections. In my work, as you'll see, I use stone in a more found object way, kind of build on it. So we really are a confluence of opposites. Here's a shot of what the lumberyard looked like at the turn of the century. It was a veneer mill. It was the workers here you can see. This is actually our house now, and you can see the way it was in the 30s. This is the sculpture garden as it stands now. It goes through all its seasons. We're right on the river. It makes a fantastic place to live and work. Oh, I know. We're lucky enough to be included in a recent publication called Art Parks in North America. And the major places that display sculpture primarily throughout the North American continent are in this book. It's a great book and it has kind of helped us a lot in the sense that it has alerted people to who we are and where we are, and we end up with a lot of visitors, which is nice. I often give this talk in places other than this same latitude. like your location is very much like the Adirondacks, meaning you address the change of seasons, the hot, the cold, that kind of thing. You know, when I give a talk in, for instance, in China or Abu Dhabi, they have no idea what the Adirondacks are, and they're kind of intrigued to learn that. Anyway, so I'm starting out with early works. As my very first stone carving as an undergraduate was in Vermont marble, not too far from here. It was Gaia, the Mother Earth. I realized early that stone was heavy and it needed to be moved around. And one of the ways I got around that was starting to incorporate more than one piece in the sculpture. There's a piece called Vertical Series. I should mention that when I started college, I was a jock. I was a skier. I went to St. Lawrence University. I thought I was going to be a gym teacher at the other end. And I got involved through liberal arts, through exposure to the arts, theater, music, all that. I ended up as a sculptor. And you can see some of these early works are actually, in some ways, are reminiscent of carved skiing tracks. Then an interesting thing happened. I was working, carving, imposing myself on the stone, carving it into these kind of wedge-like shaped forms. And one day, I was almost finished with this work. It looked a lot like this, and I set it up on the carving table, and I propped it up with some chips of marble, and I was standing back, and I was just admiring the hell out of it, and all of a sudden, ooh, bam, right on the floor. And I walked over, I was looking at it, I was totally blown away. I walked around for about an hour. Finally, the sun was coming in the studio, and the broken parts were sparkling away. And I thought, oh, wow. So there were a couple of large pieces, and I put them back up on the table, I propped them up, and I ended up pinning them to a stainless steel plate. It's a piece I call Falling Stone, and it was a huge pivotal moment for me. It was the point where I turned away from carving, imposing myself on the material, and learning to accept it as it is, much the way you'd accept stone in a Japanese garden. From that point, I didn't really carve stone again. I started finding stone, very typical of what's around here, this granite curbstone. It was free. I had a truck. I piled it in, brought it back to the studio, and started creating these very almost calligraphic sculptures down over, using the drilling channels here and here as kind of punctuation points, talking about how the stone was quarried and allowing that to speak. Another piece quite similar. Then I realized I wanted to get bigger. And again, stone was heavy, so I found a cache of beams, and I started creating kind of architectural sculpture. Things that were like, this is called gate, and it was really the first piece that I used the real weight of the stone, which before that was typically heavy and negative, to counterbalance the sculpture. I was also looking at Japanese architecture at the time, and particularly at two architects in Southern California, Green and Green, who were very influenced by Japanese architecture. I know it's hard to see here, but right here are straps and wedges that hold this structure together. And what I was trying to do was, in my own very primitive way, strap and hold the stones to the wood in a way that was really upfront. I wasn't trying to disguise it. I wasn't pinning it. I wasn't gluing it. These were assemblages, assembled sculpture, and the way they were assembled was upfront and part of the subject matter. In fact, they were kind of the subject matter. Then I moved away from the wood altogether, allowing these found stones, these are quarry stones, so they're not from nature per se, but they're the way I found them, and then integrated them into this structure with tension. And you'll see in the next piece kind of how it's held together. These are forged solid bars of steel that are interlocked, and in this sculpture the piece rests on the two outside edges and it floats from here to here. So in a sense you're loading this sculpture. It's almost like a sculpture event. It's like a mousetrap, and when you put it together it's being held together by its own energies. That means I've taken the negative of the weight of the stone, that pain in the butt of moving it, storing it, and turned it into a positive. It is actually the glue that holds these assemblages together. You can see it here from the side, low and lean, almost like a landscape. Here's an example of kind of how I was forging. Put the solid bar on the table, heat it up with a torch, like a roast bed, and get it to the point where you could actually bend it. So I was bending it into these kinds of interlocking elements. Now, the sculptures themselves rely, there's no welds, there's no glue, there's no pinning. It's all about the way the energy falls back, interlocks, and is traced and focused in these energy nodes. Were pieces that developed a little further, and I started using titles like torque. Torque to describe what was happening. Here, a large piece touching down here, and here the energy's traced through, and again, it's like a static energy event. Kinetic sculpture, but it's not really moving. It's in arrested motion. Here's another torque piece. Then I had a chance this was work that I did in graduate school, and I had a chance, I was hired right after leaving Ithaca to teach at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. And for somebody growing up in the East, growing up in New England, moving to this landscape that seemed barren to me at first was incredible. I mean, they had these unbelievable formations, and they were stripped bare. You could see the geology. You know, for a stone sculptor, that was really important to me. I became more aware of the sedimentary stone that was happening there. And I started using that same kind of system of binding the works and reiterating the way the stone came out of the mountain, using it like this, but allowing its weight to push down. Here, it wants to splay, and the more it splays, the harder it pushes down. So it's building on itself. There was other influences, of course. I had a chance to travel to the Yucatan Peninsula, be around the pyramids. The pyramid shape, of course, was important, but also the whole business of tracking the sun and the movements of the planets, which comes later, and I'll talk about that a little bit. This idea of stacking, you'll see, this is some wood that I found in France traveling. So these kinds of things started to develop. I started putting round bars in between, both as an idea to create a sense of visual tension, but also as a practical way to get your fingers in and out so you didn't pinch them when you were putting the piece together. So what was cool about this system was, you know, I could build a fairly big sculpture. This is maybe 4, 5, 6 feet high, but it could come apart. Actually, with one other person, I could take it apart, pile it in my van, and move it. One at a time, but so it was getting over finding a solution to a problem rather than using one big chunk of stone. And this piece was actually on exhibit for a while at the Marble Gallery in New York on 57th Street, along with Barbara Hepworth and some other major people there. So that was kind of exciting for me. And then this is a piece similar. It's called Wedge. It's got the same interlocking business going on. It was designed and built for the American Museum of Art. And then you can see this, I started doing at the same time, kind of slightly moving away from this interlocked kinds of pieces. The Western landscape again, the natural arches there were inspiration. I started building these arch forms. Again, you think about an arch, it's a self-supporting architectural element, perfect for kind of what I was trying to describe. I had pieces called prop, where you actually, the energy is retained by this. There's a little clip here as an energy node, and you build these pieces like this. And so there's a sense of reality, realism there. Not the realism that you see in a painting that's painted every blade of grass or looks like a dog or a cow or a cat, This has reality in a different sense. It's the real. If it falls on your toe, you will know it. It's real energy. And so it's just a different way of looking at realism in art. Then I got to the point where I had said what I wanted to say with this series, and I started feeling like I was backing myself into a corner, that I could only do certain things. And I found, I started to think about, well, how can I use this? How can I move out of this? And I had a piece called Tripod with Umbilical, 1982. And these look like wood, but they're actually slabs of granite, wrapped with my sort of signature wrappings. But I allowed myself this little flourish. It's sort of the sense of the thing is moving, its flag is behind it. It's sort of, to me, and I hope to my viewers in history, that it's signaling a moving away from that period. What follows soon after that is pieces like this, where I found incredible piles of I-beams and pipes and granite nearby my studio, and I thought, wow. So that sort of prompted this next series of what is called, some people call the urban architecture series. Now, I talked about sort of accepting the stone. If you think about Eastern philosophies, and particularly Japanese gardens like this, they are celebrating the spirit of the stone. In a certain way, I try to do that in my work. But I also combine it with kind of an American can-do industrial side. So in the best of my works, they're an amalgamation of accepting the stone in a kind of Eastern Oriental way, Asian way, and capturing that energy through the strength and engineering of steel. Also, the figure is starting to creep into these works. This title is called piqué à terre. Piqué à terre is a move in classical ballet, some of you may know. Piqué, the toe touches just slightly. Terre, the other foot's firmly planted, and the arm makes a gesture like this. So by bringing that title in, it sort of frames these chunks of stone, these elephants, in a kind of choreographed way. You can see it as an arch, you can see it as a portal, but once you know the title, it gives you another window into the piece. And I've worked on quite a few in a series like this, the Piqué à Terre series, or other dance moves. A piece called Los Arcos. Interesting. This is about 8 feet high. You can walk underneath this. This is an I-beam that I found in Chicago when I was out there. A building had burned and collapsed, and they were piling all the I-beams up. I had my truck out there, and I walked over to the foreman and, flashed a $20 bill, and I said, I'd love to have some of this steel, and he said, go for it. And so I ended up with a series of these wonderful arced I-beams that... So it's a way of getting this stone, as I said before, up in the air and dancing, using what you know as that the energy of gravity, again, negative, and turning it into positive. A piece that came along a little bit later called Reconsidering Sisyphus. How many of you know the myth of Sisyphus? The story of the poor guy who, was nasty in this world. When he got to the underworld, his punishment forever was to push the stone to the top of the mountain, right? He gets to the top of the mountain, it rolls down, he's got to push it again. Over and over and over, endlessly. So if someone says it's a Sisyphean task, that means it's never ending. And in a certain way, I kind of see that as a perfect sort of metaphor for me and kind of artists in general, particularly someone who works in stone. I'm always pushing, not literally up a hill, but kind of creatively you reach a creative peak. You finish the work, comes down, oh shoot, you don't have to, but you start over. It's just part of an artist's makeup. And there's no end. You don't, retire at 65 magically. You just keep going. But that's kind of a negative way to see this whole Sisyphean myth. And if you know a little bit about existential philosophy, not that I do, but I know a little bit about what Camus wrote, Albert Camus. He wrote a great couple essays on Sisyphus. And the main part of that essay, the main kernel for me, was, we have to reconsider Sisyphus. It's not a punishment, it's the process that we need to focus in on. It's not like getting to the end of the journey is not the most important thing, it's the journey itself. It's the creative act. And for artists, the creative act is the most important. The actual object, painting, piece of pottery at the end just embodies that act, that creative process. So I find that myth is a great metaphor, a great vehicle to frame a lot of what I do. And this is the very first piece in 1994, and I'm still making Sisyphean circles, and I'll show you a few more of those as we go. Some other influences. I showed you the other kinds of stacking. These are raw stones in a quarry near Carrara. I love these chains. My studio for a while was in Jersey City. I was near a marine scrapyard. I got a lot of crazy chains and buoys and cleats. And of course, the boat form is really interesting because it's you use it in sculpture or in art. It's really, again, a metaphor for passage, container. A work from 91 called Link. And really, this is kind of a kernel or a quintessential piece for me in that it's got two rough granite pieces, but it's linked together by this chain. And this chain is not just a normal piece of chain, it's actually a special super link. It's called a pelican clip. And if you flip this open that up, you can then clip in the chain, another piece of ocean chain. So it's a link about a link, and the idea of me linking nature with man-made, human-made, is really kind of at the core of my work, and I guess expressed in this piece in a good way. I mentioned buoys. I'm getting a lot of buoys and cleats, a piece called Buoy. Vessels. I put this in because this is where I found this piece. Part of my work, and I guess the fun part, is finding all these crazy things. This happened to be in Texas, in Sherman, Texas, when I was out there, and I had to ship this back, right? And this is like, yeah, okay, it's not a bomb, really. You can send it back. Anyway, this part, this piece is 12 feet high, is the section from here to here, and I also cut this off and made another section, another piece. Piece called Charon's Steel Stick Passage. Again, a nod to mythology. Charon, you probably know, is the ferryman who ferried the dead across the river Styx. And I kind of played with the idea of steel stick, S-T-Y-X. Here's a big long steel stick. Here's the ferry kind of careening down to maybe the underworld. For me, it was a chance to, because I love boats, particularly love wooden boats, but this was a chance for me to build a shiplap kind of ferry boat in steel, which was kind of fun. And then at the top here on the bow, I guess, I put a bronze disc, and that's to sort of complete the myth. To get passage to the underworld, you had to pay the ferryman You have a question? No? Oh, yeah, speak up. I can't see there. Yeah.
So I'm assuming these were extremely heavy. How did you get these
up in the air?
Yeah.
Oh, I should do a whole thing on that. I've got cranes all over the place in my studio. Ones that I built. I have a nice knuckle crane on my truck, which was the best piece of equipment I ever bought because I can now pick these things up and bring them home. And luckily, I have a big enough studio where I can just keep them all there right now. When I lived in Jersey City, I had to jam everything inside a small building, and if I didn't, I left it outside, and the scrappers would come and take my beams. It was unbelievable. Anyway, but just to get back to this piece, people ask me often when they see it, well, why are you making a piece about death, going down to the underworld? And actually what this piece is about, it's not about getting down here. It's, this is out here, the aura is up. It's about affirming life, living life while you have it, right? So that do it before it's too late, I guess, is the... I had a great opportunity to travel in England, and my mission on this was not to see all the normal sites, but I wanted to see the standing stone sites. And because working with stone, seeing these there are mythic places And it prompted the largest and kind of the conclusion piece for the interlocking steelworks. I was asked to design a piece for Billings, Montana, to celebrate their 100th anniversary of the city. Most people thought they were going to get an equestrian statue of Frederick Billings. And were they surprised to see this kind of thing starting to develop in the city square, right? It's kind of interesting because I had a small model of this, and I presented it to the installers, the guys that were running the backhoe, and they said, okay, yeah, we'll start. And they started digging the holes and working. And all this time, I couldn't do much. So I go across the street here to the bar. I'd sit in the window, and people would come by, and they ask the operators, what are you doing? What are you building? And I can see the guy's going now, and he goes like this, and it goes like this, and it goes like this. And I go, great. And so when it was finally finished, they had a big unveiling on Friday afternoon, but we finished it on Thursday, and they covered the whole thing in black plastic, right? And they're going to unveil it, and I'm going to give a speech. It's like, oh boy, this is going to be fun. And indeed, they unveiled it. There were tons of people around, and everybody's kind of scratching their head. But the good thing that they did, the people that were organizing this, they organized a luncheon at the Holiday Inn. And many of the people were invited to come, and I gave a short talk. And those people, gained an insight into kind of what this was about. And they came up to me after, and they were saying, we don't know anything about contemporary art, but this really makes sense, and we love it. And this piece is from 1982, has been out. And you can imagine, this how it would attract graffiti has never been graffitied. So I think that's pretty successful. Yeah. And moving on, I'm going to talk about some bigger works here, the commissions. I didn't really visit Stonehenge, but I bring it up because it's an important, everybody kind of knows Stonehenge, and that it was, tracked the solstice, the marking of the longest day, the shortest day of the year. And in fact, calendars are really our oldest human instrument, one of them. It was, designed for our ancient ancestors to know when to harvest, when to plant. And so at Austin College, they asked me to design a piece to go between the art building and the science building. I thought, here's a chance to actually build a sculpture and incorporate science. So growing up in the Adirondacks, I used to ski a lot at this place called Gore Mountain. And this chairlift would go under this incredible glacier, go over this glacial boulder that was split. And it always attracted me. And so when I started thinking about how can I build a sculpture that will make sense, I started thinking about this split. And what I came up with was to align the piece in such a way that it was true north-south. So this long element is pointing north-south. And as the sun comes up, and exactly when it reaches its zenith, which would be solar noon, it would cast beam of light here, a shadow would be created, and that shadow would end up here on the marking stone. Now, on the shortest day of the year, your sun is lowest, and the mark is way out here. And then each day after that, it's shorter, moves up to the equinox, and then finally the summer solstice. And, this is all well and good, but this was really before computers, 1986. And, how do you figure that out? Well, sine, cosine, tangent. And I hadn't done that for a while. So. But at the same time, I had been living out in Wyoming, and the western landscape is full of these kinds of sundials by the Native American Indians. I mentioned Chichen Itza, the pyramids that on the equinox, the sun is in such a way, you probably know this, that this snake, it appears that the snake is coming down and eating itself. And then also in Chichen Itza, they have this place called the observatory, where different times of the year, sun will come in or Venus will come in, and they have it all marked out. So they really had a great sense of the calendar. And I was trying to build on that, I guess. So went ahead, made a drawing, and made a scale model, and then I convinced the people that the money was there, or they could give me the money, and we went and we started splitting the stone. And this is in Texas, and this is the way you split these big chunks of stones, called plug and feather. Probably some of you know that because granite is a big deal around here. But But the guys that were working with me, these guys particularly, they're going, "You're building a calendar? What the hell? You can go to the hardware store and get a calendar. Why are we doing all this?" I said, "Well, you just hang in there. It's going to be worth it." And so, you know, we get it set up. It's pretty serious. And you get it set with the marking bar. And here is the marking stone. I cut a granite trough that would catch water. And it ended up really working, man. It was like right on. So here, when the sun comes down, the shadow's created. Here are the marking bars. And people, well, I don't know if they love it, but they sure have. It's been incorporated into the campus so that it gets wide use, not just to tell the calendar dates, but the rock climbing group loves it because they love to climb and rappel off it. And as I was telling some of the colleagues at dinner tonight, when the old days when they had hazing, they would, fraternities, sororities would fill these troughs up with mystery liquid and make their pledges partake to become part of their group, I guess. So, public art.
John, is that the piece that you did without the benefit of the sun? And you kind of...
No, actually, that's coming up, and I'll explain that. Thank you, Rick. Here's another version. This was done in Washington, D.C. It's set up so this is the stylus, you know, so it has a sculptural quality, but it also has a calendar nature. This is pointing true north-south. As the sun comes down at solar noon, creates a shadow, and this was taken right on the winter solstice. Hard to see, but the shadow is right there. So every day after this, the sun's going to be a little higher, the shadow's going to creep down until it reaches the equinox, and then finally the summer solstice. A similar piece, this was commissioned by people as a memorial. An FBI agent, Charles Reed, was killed in the line of duty in Philadelphia, and they wanted to make a memorial, and they asked me to design it. So I did something similar. This is designed, of course, inscribed with a story about what happened, but what I did here, and this is what's happening here, is that this is designed so exactly on the day that he unfortunately died, the sun lines up and the shadow is created right there. So it's a perpetual reminder, a marker that goes on and reminds folks of his sacrifice. And I was telling Rick this morning when I was talking about this, when we set this up, it was outside of Philadelphia, and the FBI, you know, Chairman Miller came, all the limousines, all the family. And we set it up like the day before, 2 days before, and it was totally cloudy. So there was no way to test whether this thing was really going to work. But, of course, on the day of dedication, it's bright and sunny. And I'm holding my breath saying, man, I hope this works, because exactly at 1:20, everything stopped. Everybody looks over, and sure enough, a shadow came, and it lined up exactly on the marker. So I was happy. Everybody was happy. Another piece, this is for University of Indiana at Terre Haute. This is much the same in the sense that it has the marking things, but it's got something special, and that's where it gets its title. Via Solaris is Latin for the way of the sun or the road of the sun, and it's got kind of a way of the sun, a sun tunnel right here. So on the equinox, the sun comes through and illuminates a special spot. You know, that's pretty, it's in ancient architecture, that's kind of common, not common, but you see it in some tombs and burial sites. But most of us know it from the Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? Admit it. You saw it there. It was cool. One challenge, one negative that we had to deal with here is that the piece was on the north side of the building. So during the winter solstice, or the winter, the angle of the sun was not even hitting the sculpture. So we had to design it and get this just high enough so that it would line up exactly, the shadow would disappear on the winter solstice. Here's the scale model, a little bit of the fabrication, and then the installation. What we tried to do is we set this, we call this, well, the anchor, and it would fit in here, so the piece, when it was finally set, it would just feel like it's rocking, just ready to roll off. And oops. And this was really before the landscaping. It's bronze and stainless steel. And here, this is before we put in the actual marker, where we were testing it. And so a little before noon, you get this. And one thing I didn't expect, you get this kind of glow, almost like a lunar crescent. And it moves in a little bit, and then a little bit, and then blam, it just nails it. So at this point, we marked it, and we put in this special granite insert, and this is what it looks like. And right here is the sunspot. So it comes around, illuminates right here, plus it gives you the little story of the piece. And what's nice about and interesting about these pieces, I think, is that they are kind of teaching tools. One of the things they do is the middle schools bring students, kind of their earth science students, and it's a good way to explain the changing of the seasons and the sun angles and that. And it's a real kind of demonstrator. So it is a science tool, and I believe it's a work of art at the same time. Another piece that I did was for the Indianapolis Airport in Indianapolis. Cardinalis, the cardinal is the state bird, so I was trying to build on the idea of building a local rapport, I guess. The sites in the new airport were going to be either here or here, and it actually ended up in this location. I started out, and what I wanted to do, and this is, I'm kind of basing it on these works that I'd done before, where you're just up in the air, touching. These are called camembert pieces, like it's a move-in ballet, where you're just touching the toes and kind of moving forward. So I wanted to create something like that, but I couldn't use stone this big, so I thought, well, maybe a wing. And I happened, a high school friend of mine actually was in the Navy Air Reserve, and was a base commander. I would see him every summer. We'd come and kayak, and I asked him, gee, is there any chance I can get a wing? I got a project. He goes, well, yeah, let me see. Next thing, you know, a couple months later, this gigantic wing shows up. It's part of an F-14, and I was able to incorporate the wing into the project. And we fabricated it in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Just this little chunk here, which is 20-some feet, 4 feet in diameter, 1 inch wall thickness. Cost $25,000 just to roll that thing. But it's sturdy and cut. And here we are installing at the airport. And I was joking, I think I'm the only sculptor that's made it to the cover of Construction Digest, which was fun. Here's where we inscribed my signature. And one of the things that part of the contract was, because the airport was still being built, I had to wrap this thing until everything was done. So just wrapping this darn thing took, finding a tarp big enough was a chore, and then wrapping it and keeping it protected. But I love that shot. It's sort of like a Christo piece, if you're familiar with his work. So here is the finished piece. You can see it here now in scale. It's about 35 feet high. And tucked in over here, and then if you get a sense of the scale, that's me standing there. Also, it was mentioned in the intro, I had a chance, and both myself and Caroline were invited to do works for the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Kind of a neat deal, because they had over 3,000 entries, and you had to submit your work, and it was reviewed, and it took forever. And, you know, I almost had given up. And finally, we got a notice that we were both sort of made the next cut, and we had to send our scale models in. And there was an exhibit of the scale models. I think I have it here. I'll talk about that in a minute. But here's another one of my Sisyphean circles, the idea of the stone in the circle and that sort of perpetual idea. You have to come up with a good sort of connection to the Olympics. Mine was rings of unity. What did I actually say? I forget. Anyway, I'll tell you in a minute. Another Sisyphean circle that it was based on. These are smaller scale gallery works. Another circle. Another outdoor piece. And here we are with the scale models. So Caroline's piece was here, and here's mine. And that's where the international jury comes in. They take a look, and then they select the actual 50 artists that are going to be selected from out of China. And we were lucky enough to both be included in our little town of Wells, New York. We had 2 Olympic sculptors. We were pretty big deals there for a while. Initially, my idea, because I'm working with circles, I wanted to build on the idea of the Olympic symbol or emblem. And if you might know it or not, the different colors are representative of the different colors in all the flags of all the countries. And I don't know how they came up with this, but they consider 5 continents in the world. There's probably 6, maybe 7. But anyway, so this is a symbol of the interlocking of the continents and the symbol of unity. So my idea was to make 5 sculptures using stone from the 5 different continents. And I thought, wow, this will be great. I'll get to go to all these countries, select stone. Man, it'll be a wonderful adventure. And I would be able to place them in a circle around the bird's nest, which is the stadium, and wouldn't that be cool? Well, they liked my idea, but they thought one was enough, and Chinese stone was perfectly fine, and so we ended up making one and using Chinese stone. So here is the assembly studio, not actually OSHA approved, but pretty cool, and it got the job done, and here's the piece. And here's a map of where they are located. Here is the bird's nest, which is the stadium, which some of you might remember. Caroline's work is here, here. And my piece is out here. And I like to, making negatives positive. I refer to this as a gateway piece, right? It's out there, and it's what you see when you travel the whole thing. And by the way, this park goes on and on for about 5 miles, and it has some really cool pieces, and I'll show you those in a minute. I want to get one more large-scale piece. This was for Michigan State University, and oftentimes a university, a prospective client will come to you and say, we like your work, we would like you to make some proposals. And what I often do is I'll go there, I photograph the site, and then digitally, using programs like Photoshop, insert different small sculptures so that gives the client an idea of what you're wanting, or what you think it might look like. So we ended up going through a bunch of them. We kind of decided on this idea of a funambulist. Funambulist is kind of like a fancy word, Latin-based. Funam, rope, ambulate, to walk. So it's basically a rope walker or wire walker. And I was kind of inspired by Philippe Petit. Do you know the story? He was the guy that walked between the 2 trade towers in 1974. It's a wonderful documentary. If you haven't seen it, it's so worth it. And because my work is about balance a lot, is a big component of it, I really like the idea, and I also like this kind of balance baton or beam. So I ended up with this particular funambulist. I went there, again, I photographed the site. This is before we did the Photoshop, or I did the Photoshop, and you get a sense of before. And so this is what I present to the committee, and some other views. They got excited. They gave me the contract. We started working with a fabricator. They took a 3D scan and started producing the engineering drawings. And we started fabricating. Amazing amount of structural things that go into this. And then developing it a little further in their outdoor shop. And then it was brought to Michigan State, and we started installing it. And pretty exciting day. And here's what it looks like now. The funambulist. I understand it's affectionately referred to as Mr. T. Some of you may not get that reference, but it was a television show a few years back. Now, I also had a chance to get invited one more time back to Beijing for Tsinghua University. Tsinghua is like their Harvard, and they were celebrating their 100th anniversary, and they wanted to commission 100 sculptors to do 100 sculptures, and they wanted 50 non and 50 Chinese. So there's a couple of the pieces that were done, very interesting projects. My proposals were, again, based kind of on the Sisyphean myth. I had another one, a funambulist, and then the piece that was finally chosen was the passage piece. passage. The boat form, the vessel form is really kind of a metaphor, a container for passage from beginning the college to hopefully ending or finishing it. And it's also a more universal metaphor for all of us as we kind of go through our stream of life. And this is what came out. It was really pretty cool. This is steel, forged and bent. That's like, inch thick steel. Pretty cool. And of course, then the Chinese love to make a big deal about it. You're all up there, you get your special diploma and all this. It's all on television. But the most fun part of all of these is the camaraderie of being there with the other artists and the great, food and lodging and getting to see the rest of the parts of Beijing, which we were lucky enough to do. Here are a couple other of the artists I thought were interesting, carved in stone. I also found that the trees were just as interesting as they kind of built this scaffolding around to hold the trees up, as interesting as some of the sculpture. This is what Caroline's piece in granite this time, another interesting piece there. And some other fun marble. Remember, these are marble mostly. And here a shot of the bird's nest in Beijing. Oh, and this is where I wanted to show you just a few shots of some of the other sculpture that's in the garden. It's a long walkway. Have any of you been there in Beijing? Done that? It's worth stopping if you can. They've got, incredibly lifelike statues. They've got these guys running through glass. But what really I found was beautiful were these natural stones that were not carved, but just found. And here's a sense that you are accepting the stone and letting it speak to you. These are, I guess, the geological term is diking, where at a different geological time, a different stone is pushed in a kind of liquid way, and you end up with these beautiful patterns, exquisite work. I also came across this guy, which I love, because my work is very much, my drawings particularly, is a lot like calligraphy, where you do it very quickly and move on. And this guy here was just a street artist, but he was just working away. Every sidewalk block was like a piece of paper or a canvas, and he would just work and do a beautiful piece, and then he'd move on, and he'd move on, and then at the other end, the water was evaporating, so it was just ephemeral, and it was just this beautiful, almost like a performance. And he was, God, it was so engaging. So one of my drawings where I work pretty quickly, trying to get things down in a hurry, and I don't know if a hurry, but directly like calligraphy. These are studies for a piece that I did in Saratoga Springs called Tempered by Memory. It was a 9/11 memorial project using 9/11 steel from the trade towers that came down. And we had to make a proposal, and it was accepted by the Port Authority. Then we got invited down to Hangar 17 in JFK Airport, where they were storing the choice pieces that were all tagged and cataloged, and almost a forensic of where they were in the building, what the forces were on them. It's one of the most incredible days, actually, in my life, to walk around and see. These were kind of normal, but there were pieces that were just crunched up. You could tell the pieces that were at the top of the building where the planes hit, and where the fuel and the fires were hotter, because they were a whole different color and different shaped. Anyway. We got to see some of this is a big Calder stay-bill, Calder the sculptor, that was crushed, and they had exhumed, I guess you'd say, these pieces, and they were, I guess they're in the museum at Ground Zero. These things were incredible. These were just, I don't know what you call them. They're like, everything is squished into thing from the heat, the pressure. And most of these were taken over to Staten Island and broken apart to see if they were human remains or other clues. But there were a few pieces that were left that were just stunning. And of course, you see, these are all in the museum now, but this was in the hangar, fire trucks and rescue trucks. So out of all this chaos, this is a part of the TV tower that was on the top of one of the buildings. So we picked some pieces, and the trick was you could take really what you wanted, but you had to get it out of there, and that meant you had to have the wherewithal with trucking and permits. And we ended up with a friend of ours who had a big trucking company, and he was able to get the permits for us. This is Noah Savitt. We worked together on this project along with a whole host of folks, including retired union iron workers. The original site was to go downtown Saratoga in front of the new city center. So this is kind of a little bit of a mock-up. And everybody was happy, but when the piece started being built, it got too big and too crazy for that location, and we ran into some roadblocks. These are a couple scale models that I built, not using trade tower steel, but steel that I had around, trying to get a sense of what we wanted to do. We wanted a piece that was a memorial, of course, but we wanted it to be more than that. We wanted it to be kind of suggesting of kind of rising up, kind of coming up out of the ashes, kind of phoenix idea, suggesting that it might have fallen, but rising up at the same time. So these are a few digital mock-ups that I was doing. And then the rubber hit the road. We're starting to build. We had to build a big framework so we could work around it. You can see the iron workers here. These guys were great. They all came. In fact, we had in our budget, because we had to raise the money, we wanted to pay the iron workers, and they said, no way. We want to do this because we want to do it. You know, no payment needed. So that was really fun. And here we are. Pete Menelowski, he's kind of the foreman, and he's having a blast because these guys, their whole career, have worked off of blueprints, right? They're building square buildings, and here we are, you know, really by the seat of our pants, kind of working away and making a real team effort, I guess. We had a photographer that worked with us, in beautiful pieces. That's a whole exhibit in and of itself. And here we are finally getting it together. And some of the shots, this is a plaque that I made, and it's on the piece. And here's the location. And it's, you know, we got this light pole here. It's all kinds of problems. And they wouldn't move the light pole. They wanted to jam the sculpture over there. Finally, no, we're not going to make our September 11th deadline. This is for the 10-year anniversary. So it had to be put off. We actually tried to propose a couple other places around Saratoga, but to no avail. And, you know, big controversy. We didn't make it. We actually had to have town hall hearings. This is town hall, city hall in Saratoga. You can see all the board of governors or whatever, and people coming in saying, we want it, we need it, we've worked hard. We had other people like this crazy nut who said, no way, you know, and he had a little thing up here with photographs or drawings of people hanging from the sculpture. Can you imagine that? It's like, yeah, people are going to get drunk and they're going to hang themselves on this thing. We don't want it. And then we had people like Pete Menelowski, the metal worker. He got up and said, you know, we busted our asses on this, and we want it up, and we want it up. And it was all on, you know, Channel 13 News. Oh, my God, it was a big deal. Anyways, we didn't make it. We had our own ceremony on September 11th, 2011, in the yard where we built it. But we actually found, and here's another way negatives turned positive, by waiting we found a beautiful site, and it's in High Rock Park. Here's the piece being transported, and here at the dedication. It's actually in a really nice amphitheater, much better for the piece. This area here is all stone, and now they've cleaned that all off, and it's really landscaped. And it's a much more contemplative, more private, more reflective space than if it was on the main street. And here's a shot in the winter. And speaking of winter, and you all are familiar with winter here, you know, taking the good with the bad. I love it. I live on the river. Here's a shot. It's 30 below zero. The water's still running. You know, you get the ice on the trees. It's Dr. Zhivago. It's beautiful. It makes the sculptures look great. You know, we have beautiful waterfalls that create these incredible natural sculptures, I guess, kinds of currents that create their own little spiral jetties. But you also have the downside of winter, right? When you have so much snow on your roof, you got to dig it off, or if it slides off in some sort of slow glacial movement, keeps piling up, piling up. This is my studio. I had a door there for a while. This is the window in the shop that, it first falls off. I run out and put one board. I think I'm good. Oh no, more comes. Oh, another board. Oh no, more. And finally, boink, and even breaks the window. So winter has its rough side. But what do you do with that? We decided that we were going to try to turn the winter into something good. So we hung like a giant rope here, set up this deal with a sprayer, and for days we sprayed on to create this sort of curtain. And after it created its sort of stalactites, stalagmites, we were able to cut the ends, and the thing stood free. It was this beautiful piece. And I drug a light out here and shined a light so that back to the house. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then we decided, well, we're going to try to build our own Devil's Tower here. So we set up, and it's kind of spraying up. Day 2, it's getting a little bigger. Day 3, day 4, it's getting really funky. And day 5, the beard falls off, but it's it gets a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. This is fun. Every day you go out and you look and the thing is growing. And man, it got crazy here. And finally, we're kind of near Route 30, right? And the people are driving by and they're going, what the heck is that? And they pull in, and finally I got a call from the town supervisor, because I was using town water. And he goes, John, you're not using town water down there to do that funky thing, are you? I go, yeah. He goes, well, I don't think that's a good idea. We've got a lot of people in the town that don't have water, and you're flaunting it. Now, I really wasn't, because we're at the very end of the line, and our water lines drain into a little creek down here, and it goes into the river. So I was just delaying it a little bit, building the sculpture, and the nice thing about this was it lasted into June that year, so we had it. Anyway, so another way of turning negatives positive. So that's all I have tonight.
What was your first commission?
First commission, wow. Well,
Should remember that.
I can remember the first sale. That's even better. I was an undergraduate at Kent State, and there was a regional show at the Cleveland Museum. And it was kind of a big deal because all the artists, including my professors, would submit work and they would get in, and so I was a young undergraduate. I said, shit, I'll do that, and I got in, right? So it put me on a platform with my professors, which was a real kind of boost. And to make it even nicer, I got there and there was a nice red dot on it, so that was pretty memorable. But I also worked, and just to mention that, I worked as a production potter for years as well through that time, and that allowed me to make things, and actually people were buying things, so it gave me the sense that you could actually make something with your hands that people wanted to buy, and it helped me when I had to make that decision to move out of academics. I mean, I taught for 10 years, had a tenure-track job, but in 1986 I decided I needed to back away. I wasn't being the best professor I could be, and I wasn't being the best artist, and I had to choose. And so that was a pretty big leap. Yeah.
How long does it take you to make some of the giant stone and steel sculptures?
Yeah.
You have to go through an inspiration process and then a designing process and then gathering the stuff.
Yeah.
How long does it take?
Well, sometimes those big projects, from the time that you are asked to start with the ideas, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, but the kernel of the idea happens fairly quick, right? If it's a funambulist or a Sisyphean circle, quick in the sense, at this point in my career, I can kind of get it together. But it's taken all those years to get there, and plus all of the time to gather the materials even for the scale models, right? But then it takes a while, and building those big sculptures is like you have to get permits and engineers to sign off on it. Liability, the last thing you want is to fall on somebody, and so that takes a while, usually about 2 years on those big ones. Yes.
So regarding all the projects that you have worked on, what was your favorite material to build with and least favorite material to build with?
Wow. Favorite material, that's interesting. Well, I'll tell you one thing, my dad, when he was alive, and he was helping me a lot, he thought I should work in styrofoam instead of stone and steel. I can't tell you how many times he told me that. But styrofoam, no. I don't know, that's a good question. I think each material has its own advantages and disadvantages. Stone, of course, has that sense of permanence, and you know, so really, as a sculptor, as an artist, even as humans, we want to leave a legacy. We want to leave something behind, I think, at least many of us do. And stone is a great material to do that because of its permanence. Building the sculpture in ice is ephemeral, right? It's beautiful for the moment, and like a flower, you appreciate it for that moment, and then it's gone. So it's a different perspective on that.
Is there a material that you've yet to work with that you would like to?
Oh, wow.
If there's been, like, say, difficulties acquiring it, or you just haven't reached that point yet?
Carbon fiber, maybe? I don't know. The wing that we used in the airport piece is a titanium wing. That was pretty weird because we couldn't drill it. It was like kind of interesting story. It came from the Navy, and the fabricators were like, John, we can't drill this. We don't know what to do. So I called my friend. He called the naval people. They actually sent an engineer to the fabricating place, and they put up a welding curtain. And he had some tool in there, and he drilled it and took the curtain down, and he was gone. So titanium is kind of neat. It's pretty strong and durable, but it's hard to work. Yeah. Yes, back here.
Yeah, I'll second that, titanium being hard to work. I've
Yeah.
actually heard that if you don't work it under heat, try and smelt it under a neutral atmosphere or a vacuum, it'll combust before it.
Gosh, I don't know. Have you actually had the experience of working with titanium? No.
Just stuff I've heard.
Yeah, well, it's durable.
That said, have you ever worked with water fountains or other kinetic sculptures?
You know, I haven't. I mean, the ice pieces, I guess, are as close to that as I've come. Water is incredibly interesting and can be wonderful and designed and choreographed. In this part of the world, where we have 6 months of winter, water pieces are kind of hard because they're shut down half the year. It doesn't mean they're not good. It does not mean if I had an opportunity to maybe work with a water designer at pieces in Florida or warmer climates, sure, that would be interesting. But I haven't had that opportunity yet, but it's on the list, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Where are some of your closest pieces to here?
To here? Oh, good question. Well, Saratoga Springs is not that close, but it's sort of close. Barry, Vermont, which is kind of up a ways from here. I don't have any pieces there, but that's where I got a lot of my granite in the early days. I get a lot of stone. Again, these aren't finished sculpture, but this is the raw material. Over near Granville, New York, which is right on the Vermont-New York border, I'm working with a lot of slate these days, which is a little different stone, a little different challenges. Let's see. You know, Washington, D.C., that's not close. There are pieces in the museum there. Dallas and Denver and Indianapolis. Not too much in the Northeast, actually. I'm hoping, and I was telling my cousin Corrine and her husband Rick, there's a big project in Amsterdam, New York, which is kind of along the Mohawk River, kind of on the New York Thruway, that might come up, and I'm hopefully that something will happen there. Not close to here, but close to where I live, so that's nice. Actually, if you're interested, I know this is not the real thing, but my website is just my name, johnvanalstine.com. There's all kinds of stuff there. You can see more works if you're interested, especially the smaller works. We focused on the bigger commissions today, but anyway. Any other questions? This guys have been great. Thanks for sticking around, and you get an extra gold star.